DEI is disappearing in America, or is it? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. A January 2025, January 20th, 2025, to be precise, presidential action reads like this: ending radical and wasteful government, DEI programs, and preferencing. It was a dictate signed by President Donald Trump, one of his first actions after being inaugurated, to rid America of this social justice rot called DEI. But is it gone? Has it been truly erased in America? Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network. That's the faith-based news outreach of Pastor Jack Hibbs's church, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills Church in California. Go to RLN and you'll find all your faith-based news offerings. I'm happy to say Bold and Blunt has been among its lineup for years now, and check out all the other offerings I have there too. Great faith-based news. You may also get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com, where if you haven't already, please subscribe to my newsletter. It comes out 3 times a week. Just go to the bottom of the WashingtonTimes.com main page and find the newsletter section. And when you click on that, it'll take you to all the newsletters we have. Mine is Best of Cheryl Chumley. You'll get my commentaries that I write at Washington Times all day long, as well as my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast. It's usually now one audio and one video. So I do one audio version usually on Tuesdays, and the video one I do on Friday, comes out over the weekend. But you don't have to worry about the dates of release, because if you sign up for my newsletter, you will get delivered to your email box my newsletter Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 3 times a week, so you won't miss anything. You can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America. It is hereby ordered, President Trump wrote in January 2025. The Biden administration forced illegal and immoral discrimination programs going by the name Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or better known as DEI, into virtually all aspects of the federal government in areas ranging from airline safety to the military. This was a concerted effort stemming from Biden's first day in office, when he issued Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. So DEI was all about advancing minorities, right? Advancing the underserved communities, as the DEI advocates like to put it. But the question is, do we really need that division in modern America? Do we really need to divide people by race, by skin color, by anything in America? When is it that we become an actual melting pot, right? Where everyone in America, regardless of skin color, regardless of gender, of which there are only 2, regardless of poverty level versus prosperity level, regardless of anything, regardless of family structure, where you're raised, what school you go to, when do we become this actual melting pot where all have equal access to what the Constitution, what the Declaration of Independence talks about, the promise of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for all? But when will liberals say that we have reached that point in time? I would say that we, as a nation, as a model, as a government, as a governing structure, are already there. We have in place not only the Constitution, we have in place state constitutions, we have in place, in some jurisdictions, even local constitutions that go above and beyond in clarifying that all all are entitled to the same pursuits of life, liberty, and happiness that anyone else is, irregardless of background. And if that isn't enough, we already have in place court after court after court ruling and determination that make clear all in America have exactly the same rights, the inherent birthrights. And with those inherent birthrights, we all have the absolute right, the absolute liberty to pursue what we consider in our own individual lives happiness, what we consider prosperity. And yeah, we're not all born with the same means. We're not all born into the same income levels. We're not all born with the same stable home life. We're not all born with the same any number of factors that somebody could point to as saying a driver of success. But we are all born with the same God-given individual rights and liberties in this country. And we have in place a government structure and a court system that recognizes that. So, excuse me, the left doesn't like to acknowledge that, because if the left were to acknowledge that, that would mean the Democrat Party would largely have no reason to exist. Think about it. The Democrats basically exist in order to create what they define as equitable circumstances, as equity, as equal playing fields. And if they were to acknowledge achievement of this equal playing field for all, then what would they have to campaign on? They couldn't campaign on taking money from A and giving money to B, because A and B, they would have to acknowledge, have the same ability to reach those levels of income earning. The exact same. They have the same opportunities. So Democrats like to keep alive the idea of this certain class, the oppressed, versus this other certain class, the oppressors. And that's how they see society. And that's what DEI speaks to. Diversity.com. I'm just going to read from that really quickly. They have this essay posted, From Civil Rights to Controversy, the Rise, Purpose, and Pushback of DEI in America. It was posted June of 2025. DEI has become a familiar term in schools, companies, and government spaces, but it wasn't always part of the conversation. DEI, this website says, was created to solve a very real problem: unequal access to opportunity. Its purpose was never to divide people or check a box. It was meant to open doors that had been closed for a long time. In recent years, DEI programs have grown rapidly, but so has the criticism. Some believe, and I count myself among this group, some believe these efforts have gone too far. Yes, they definitely have. Others, diversity.com writes, feel they don't go far enough. In some states, DEI offices have even been shut down. Yay, Donald Trump. That was me, not diversity. Back to diversity. To understand why DEI is being questioned now, we need to look at where it started, yada, yada, blah, blah. Why DEI was created. All right. The roots of DEI, for those who don't know, go back to the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement. Key legislative milestones back then: Civil Rights Act of 1964, Executive Order 11246 of 1965, requiring federal contractors to take affirmative action in hiring, and Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, expanding protections to education and gender equality. So all those efforts focused, as diversity points out, increasing access to jobs, education, opportunities, eradicating what was perceived as systemic racism and sexism, and creating, according to the DEI advocates, level playing fields and removing discriminatory walls to those level playing fields. DEI wasn't about preference, diversity.com says. It was about correcting a long-standing imbalance and ensuring fair treatment. Okay, and the beginning of the unions, right, was supposed to correct an imbalance, right? It was supposed to correct an imbalance of workers versus their employers, where employers, there were no holds bars on what employers could do to their workers. There wasn't any imposition of pay or hours or standards of work life, none of that. And so unions were supposed to have been created to give workers this voice they needed to push back against unfair working conditions imposed by their bosses. And, maybe at the time you could make an argument that it was necessary and it was something in order to course correct an imbalance that was inherently and systemically unfair. Perhaps at the very beginning, there was a good motivation for it. But now, here in America in 2026, it's long past the time of looking at these systems, DEI unions, right, which we have been for years, and questioning, are these needed? Affirmative action, same thing. Are these things needed in today's America? And I just don't see how DEI, along with affirmative action, along with most of your unions, particularly the teachers' unions, come on, they're all about what's good for the teachers, what's good for the Democrat Party, nothing about what's good for the education of youth. But I don't see how these systems are actually necessary in today's modern America, because, as I said, we not only have legislation, we not only have constitutions, but we have court ruling after court ruling after court ruling. And yes, there are unfair things that happen, but by and large, you have a voice. When something happens to you that's unfair or discriminatory, there are so many attorneys out there willing to take your case for a fee, or so many attorneys out there willing to take your case for free, combined with all these nonprofit legal organizations out there who are looking for cases to promote their particular agendas. I speak of the ACLU, for instance, or I even speak of some of the religious freedom organizations that are more conservative leaning. But there are many outlets where your voice, if you are truly discriminated against, truly downtrodden, truly unfairly targeted, there are many outlets who can help you with your cause. So do we need DEI forced down our throats through the various systems in place in America, whether those systems are the government, the military, the education system? And I say no. My guest today actually would say no as well, and he's fighting a very unfair DEI mandate in his place of higher learning. He is a professor at Arizona State University, and he was forced to take DEI training, even though there's a state law that says you can't force public employees to take DEI training. Owen Anderson, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me.
So I understand your story is you, as an Arizona State professor, you were forced to take DEI training, even though Arizona has a state law that says public employees cannot be forced to take DEI training. So start at the beginning. What happened to you?
Yeah, that's right. So it was about 3 years ago, I received an email. All of the ASU employees received an email telling us that we had required training called Inclusive Communities, and that we needed to take this every 2 years. And the email said that the purpose of this was to advance the university's goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to help the national agenda of social justice. So it all started there, and I said, that doesn't sound good. That sounds very suspicious. But from there, I went into the training itself, and what I noticed about it right away was that it did violate Arizona law, specifically by engaging in race blame, which is the idea that you can judge a person based on their skin color and then attribute blame to them for past actions of other people who had the same skin color.
Okay. So then when you brought this to your employer's attention, what was the response?
Well, the first response was that the training doesn't exist. And I think they were saying that on a play on words, because I said, hey, I don't think we're allowed to take DEI training, but the title of the training is Inclusive Communities. Even though the email I received linked it to it, said Inclusive Communities is DEI training. And so then once I pointed out that it does exist, they said, well, it's not required. It's an option. And so then I pointed out the email that I just told you about. It says required right here. In fact, every 2 years we're supposed to take this. And so then they moved to try to get my case kept out of court. Because at that point, the Goldwater Institute was representing me to say this violates Arizona law. And instead of going to court and simply saying it doesn't and here's how we can prove it, ASU hired the law firm Perkins Coie to prevent me from even going to court. And what's interesting about that is ASU has its own team of lawyers on staff that they use for this kind of thing. But as you know, Perkins Coie is a very political law firm, and it sends a message to hire Perkins Coie for something. And especially when you hire Perkins Coie to keep something from even going to court to be debated.
So did you attend any of the training, or did you refuse right away and tried to fight it in court?
No, I went through the training, and I have a little completed button that says I completed it. But what I did also was I took screenshots of it in order to show this is not something I'm just making up. Everyone can go and look at the screenshots for themselves and make up their own minds. And I asked internally, I don't think this is right, but it was ignored. And so it was only after that I wrote a Substack article about it. I have a Substack, which is just my name, Dr. Owen Anderson. And Goldwater Institute read that and reached out and said, I think this is worthy of going to court because they're violating the state law. And one line of thinking is they're violating the state law on purpose in order to do what they're doing, which is show that employees can't even bring a case based on that state law. It's a way of nullifying the law through the courts.
So talk a little bit about specifically what the training was. So do you have examples that you can recall?
Oh, yeah. Well, the training relies on the idea that there is a dialectic between the oppressors and the oppressed, and that you can determine who an oppressor is by looking at their skin color. And what happens in this view is that the oppressors take power through something called intersectionality. So there's a kind of a graph they have that tells you where you fit on being oppressed based on things like gender, sexual preference, race. And when you put all those together, it's almost like there's a wheel with spokes, and a hub that affects everybody else is the white male. And he's the one who's oppressing all these other groups right now and in the past. And then they had various ways of explaining this, whether it was through what they call whiteness or what they call white supremacy, which sounds, of course, actual white supremacy is not good. But what the training said was that white supremacy isn't just where a white person thinks they're superior. It's the very foundation of the United States. And so you're a white supremacist without even knowing it, just by going about your business each day in the United States. And it didn't say some people. It made a claim every person, presumably every white male, is a white supremacist if they're in the United States, because that's the foundation of our country.
So what would you see as the purpose of this? So just as a devil's advocate type of response to what you just said, perhaps the university officials who required this course were just going along with this whole DEI wave that swept through America, and they weren't aware of the extent of the ridiculousness of the training that they were pushing. Could that possibly be the case? And if not, what would be the university's goal here?
Yeah, I think that's a very real possibility for some of the administrators, because the universities, I think from the outside, we give the impression that we're a place of intellectual debate and everyone has an opinion that gets to be brought out and looked at. But the actual culture among professors is one of, I think legally the term is a chilling effect, which means that if you speak up, you will be ostracized. And therefore, you toe the company line and go along with what their term is. You go along with the hegemony of their ideology and don't speak up. And so I'm very confident that there may very well have been both professors and administrators who were in the exact position you're mentioning, either because they didn't know the content or because they knew it. But if you speak up, why would you do that? You'll just bring harm on yourself and you won't make any difference. But I also think there were some who knew the content, because what ASU's email said was, this is for accelerating the cause of social justice. And therefore, it had a very specific philosophical purpose to it. And that's why it's important for the people of Arizona and really, the people of the United States, because to see the content, to see what was actually in there and not just take my word for it. And Goldwater has that posted up on its webpage under my case. And then they can see, okay, this is not just about workplace differences. Like, it makes sense. The ASU is the largest university in the country. And so it makes sense for a university to have training with its employees about how to get along. And if someone said that's all this was, people would say, okay, that makes sense. But that's not what this is. This is clearly a specific philosophy of race being pushed for the goals of what they consider to be social justice.
So how would training like that, do you think, and I'm not sure what you're a professor of, but you can address that, make it specific to you. How would training like this impact how a professor teaches a class? Math, right? Science, any class, how outside of maybe, the social, like psychology and sociology or something.
Yeah.
How would it change? How would it impact it?
Yeah, I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies, so I deal with ideas. And therefore, as a philosopher, this is kind of right up my alley. This is what Socrates did in Athens also. And so I kind of joke about that if I didn't speak up, I'd have to give back my Socrates card. But it does affect the other ones. And I documented that on my Substack, because some people said to me, well, this is probably just the humanities. We all know the humanities are crazy. And it doesn't affect the real subjects. And so I went on ASU's webpage as an empirical matter of just investigating, because I was curious. I hope you're right. I hope it doesn't affect those other subjects. And what I found was, on the so-called hard sciences web pages, all of them had this exact same kind of material, the emphasis on DEI and the sciences. And I took screenshots and put it on my Substack as a way of documenting that this is affecting, it's not just the humanities classes. This is affecting what people might call the real subjects.
And where does the case stand now? What bring us up to date?
Yeah. So we first it's coming up on 2 years when we first petitioned the court, and then that took about 8 months, and the court got back to us and said, yes, you can proceed, because after we filed our case, ASU hired Perkins Coie, and their argument was, I don't have standing. So, employee of ASU.
If you don't, who would?
As literally, you just summarized our whole response in one sentence. If I don't, who does? And we got an amicus brief written by the state senator and the state representative who wrote this law, and they both said what you just said. We wrote this law thinking of employees at our state institutions. So the first court agreed with us a year ago, December, and so immediately ASU appealed it to appeals court in Arizona, and they took another year almost, came back to us just this December and said they agree with ASU. And so 2 weeks ago, we appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court, and I think ASU has another 30 days to file their response to us, and then the Supreme Court will decide if we can go to court or not.
And
so right now, the state, it's important for everyone to know, right now it's the ASU is simply saying, we don't even want this in the court. we don't want this debated. And I think that I made the point to my colleagues. I know you may disagree with me about the content of this specific problem, DEI, but think about what happens if I lose. If ASU successfully argues that an employee can't take them to court over required training that violates Arizona law, then in hypothetically, my colleagues are worried about Trump. Some kind of MAGA movement takes over ASU, and you're forced to take training that you believe violates state law. If I lose, you can't appeal either.
Yeah.
So my case suddenly became an employment case that I represent every employee at ASU now, not just the conservative guy.
And so what are your colleagues saying quietly to you behind the scenes?
Yeah, quietly, I've got people who will tell me, thank you. They may feel they're at a vulnerable place in their career and they couldn't speak up, which I understand. I'm not judging them. And they say, thank you, I agree, this is problematic. But overall, the majority of them are definitely think that I'm wrong because there's nothing wrong with this. It's like 2 + 2 is 4. Of course, the United States, according to them, is a white supremacist country. They don't have any doubts about that. And anyone who would question that must be a white supremacist.
So I thought, when Trump came in and they took on DEI as a signature issue and tried to eradicate it from the military down to businesses, I thought it was sort of disappearing. But what you're describing is that it really isn't.
Yeah, well, the emails I'm mentioning came out before, they were during the Biden administration,
right,
so
right.
2.5 years ago. And what ASU did last spring was a number of very important grants every university had this problem, were threatened because they were grants, even in the hard sciences. They might be about physics, but it's physics with DEI. And they were approved under Biden, but then the executive orders that Trump issued in last January took those grants away. And so all universities, including ASU, are pivoting to try to keep grants or to get new grants by changing the language. But if anybody outside the universities thinks, oh, see, we did something, then you're fooling yourself, because that's just the language. The ideas are all still there. And so I've been taking note of that as well, the way that ASU is no longer using DEI, but they're using other phrases. One example is something called design justice. And so it's, well, that's not DEI anymore. Well, it's the exact same idea. We need to design the world based on their view of social justice.
Wow, they are so creative. So does Goldwater see this as a case that could extend beyond Arizona's borders?
Yeah, well, this is one important. There are two things about that answer. One is yes, because other states like Texas or Florida, Oklahoma, that are also trying to make these changes, the state legislatures are trying to make these changes, will be looking at what happens in this case, and then they can model. Let's say we lose, they can model their legal language to prevent this loophole. Or if we win, same thing, they can model it. But it also could have federal ramifications, which we explore if we win the state as a state Supreme Court, or we lose. This also does violate the executive orders that Trump put out. Mm-hmm. And so that's another possibility we'll explore once we're done with the state.
So just to clarify one more time, what are the next steps here?
Well, the next step is we're waiting to hear back from the Arizona Supreme Court about if we can even go to court, if I have standing.
Okay. And
that could take, it's unknown, because I think ASU has until mid-March to file their reply to our appeal to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And so then it's only then that the clock, so to speak, starts ticking of the Supreme Court, Arizona Supreme Court, even looking at it. And so it could be, another 6+ months. You just don't know when the courts will respond. Like I said, the appeals court, normally that's 90 days or less, and they took about 10 months.
We're going to have to stay in touch. I would love to have you back, in March or later, just to talk, revisit this. This is a fascinating case with huge, legal and even cultural implications for the fate of DEI. So, Owen Anderson, I really do appreciate you coming on Bold and Blunt. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, I'm glad we could talk. I look forward to talking again.
And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt. stay bold.